Alright, so this is chapter 3 that we are starting with today from Debraj Ray, and the introduction part basically just sets the background to why it is important to understand, to read through these economic growth models, because in the last few chapters we have already discussed that how income, which is measured through GDP per capita or GNP per capita, plays an important role in understanding or in exploring the possible growth trajectories for nations in the future, or learning about what has been the growth trajectory for nations in the past. So it is an important factor, it is an important variable in our story of development economics, and hence it becomes important to sort of read more about this variable, read more about this parameter in detail, and understand how this particular variable grows over a period of time. What are the kind of factors that are responsible for changes in income, and what sort of explains growth in income. So we basically disaggregate the notion of economic development into parts, which one of the parts being economic growth, which is solely talking about growth in income per capita, whatever the measure may be, GDP or GNP, but we are basically talking about the growth in income per capita. And it's important to know what are the situations, what are the factors, what are the kind of circumstances that leads to changes in income per capita. And definitely, I mean, we have already discussed how complex the concept of development looks like. So there would be no doubt if we come across the fact that knowing about the factors that affect economic growth, that affects income per capita, would also be a complicated process, and there cannot be one variable that sort of explains the changes in income per capita. It has to be a set of variables that will explain the changes in income per capita. And how does the entire story works is what we are going to cover in these two chapters. So moving on to section 3.2, again it just talks about some historical numbers and what has been the changes in the growth rates for different nations over a period of time. So you would notice that until the time of industrial revolution in Britain, the kind of numbers for economic growth we had witnessed for even the now developed nations was very low. It was a very small number. So if you notice, during the period 1580 to 1820, the Netherlands, which was the leading industrial nation, it experienced an average annual growth rate in real GDP per worker hour, which was about 0.2 percentage points. United Kingdom, during another period, 1820 to 90, experienced an annual growth of 1.2%. Since 1890, US had a slightly dramatic number as compared to the other nations back then, which was 2.2% a year. But if you compare these numbers, these growth numbers, to the figures that we have for these nations in the current situation, it is drastically different. So I mean, the story of economic growth was looked like this in that era, which was that nations were growing at a very small rate, and even the Indian economy was also growing at a very small rate. In fact, for the Indian case, right after independence as well, the growth rates were very small numbers, which was also called as, I'm sure you would have read this term in Indian economy as well, which is called as the Hindu rate of growth. So these growth figures has been very small in the historical time. But now what we have today is a different story altogether. So what has really changed from then to now is another question that we'll try to explore as we read about these economic growth models. But having said that, these numbers, although they look very small, but they actually reflect a very interesting aspect of the nation through the time trend. Because if you remember, we had done a rough calculation of understanding the number of years it will take for a nation to double the level of GDP. Would be 70 divided by the annual growth rate. So in the I'm not sure which chapter we did this in, but we came across this rough formula, which is that if you divide 70 by the annual rate of growth of an economy, it tells you the number of years it would take for that nation to double the level of GDP that they are at currently. So if even if you look at an average 2% rate of growth during this time period, then we can expect that any nation which is growing at 2% rate, its per capita GDP will double in 35 years, which is not a very long run, because it is a length of time that is comfortably shorter than the lifespan of an individual. So obviously, I mean, 35 years is not that huge a time period for any individual to miss out on the kind of development that's happening in a nation. So 35 years, if it takes for a country to double its GDP, then an individual can actually witness the change, witness the growth in his or her lifetime. So, modern economic growth enables people to enjoy vastly improved living standards compared to not only their fathers but also perhaps their older cousins. So, I mean, just an interesting aspect of this number is that it also tells you, just by dividing it by 70, it tells you the time it would take for a nation to double its level of GDP. Then in the next table, per capita real GDP, which is valued in 1970 US dollars for selected OECD countries in the years 1870, 1913, and 1978. The 1913 and 1978 columns include, in parentheses, the ratio of per capita GDP in those years to corresponding baseline 1870 figure. So if you remember, if you notice here, you have the per capita GDP for 1870. The text is slightly not very clear, but just try and understand that this is the column for 1870, this is the column for 1913, and this is the column for 1978. And you have the per capita GDP for some selected OECD countries here from time period 1870 to 1978. In these two columns for 1913 and 1978, you also have a ratio, which is the ratio of the per capita GDP of these nations in this year divided by the per capita GDP of these nations in 1870. And so if the number is higher, it means that compared to the GDP in 1870, that the number basically tells you the number of times the GDP has increased from the level of GDP in 1870. And if you just look at the average numbers here, then you will notice that as compared to 1870, in 1913, the average GDP of all these nations was 1.8 times as that of the GDP in 1870. Whereas if you look at the number in 1978, it is 6.7. This is 6. It is 6.7. So these numbers are actually, they basically sort of capture the basic idea of the exponential change in the growth numbers very well, because it tells you that if you look at a span of 1913 to 1978, then there has been a 3 times increase from 1913 to 1978 with respect to 1870. So if you look at 1913, then the GDP had increased by almost twice as that of 1870, but in 1978 it is almost 7 times the GDP of 1870. So definitely there has been an increasing level of growth with each passing year, with each passing decade. So, a nearly sevenfold increase in real per capita GDP in the space of a century cannot but transform societies completely. So, this level of growth we can definitely look out for drastic transformations in the world, in the societies around us. And the developing world is actually going through this kind of transformation, and we are the ones who are witnessing this kind of transformation around us. So this shouldn't come as a shock, but these numbers just try to put you through that idea of how this growth has exponentially increased with each passing records the per capita income of several developing countries relative to that of US for 1987 to 94. So, and it also records the movements of per capita income in these countries relative to US over the same period. So it records the income of these nations with respect to US in two time periods, 1987 and 1994. And in the last column it tells you whether from 1987 to 94 the income of these nations have decreased or increased with respect to that of the US income. So you will again, I mean, this figure sort of tells you the inter-country disparities in terms of the growth numbers. So if you look at they have sort of in a way arranged these countries in terms of in the increasing order of their level of development. So if you look at countries like Ethiopia, India, Kenya, China, you will notice that the number here is lesser as compared to the ratios for say Japan or Switzerland, which is I mean there is a large gap here. So if you look at this number and if you look at this number, it's a huge it holds a huge difference. Similarly, if you look at this number and this number again, so there is definitely a lot of changes as we've been talking about the trend that has happened, which is like you're looking at a time series perspective, and you're also looking at a cross-sectional perspective. So both ways we see different kinds of trends for economic growth as well. In terms of time, we definitely see that the growth figures have been increasing on an average level. Whereas if we look at the cross-country experience, we see that there is a lot of disparity and there is a lot of catching up that has to be done by the underdeveloped or developing nations, and to be able to reach at the level of the developed nations, the growth of developing nations has to be in fact greater than that of the developed nations, so that when developing nations are growing at a faster pace as compared to the already developed nations, then only it is possible that they will be able to match up to the level of the developed nation. So this table just sort of gives you a brief idea of the currents of the situation in 1987, 1994 of these different countries with respect to the US economy. First model, the first theory that we are going to cover and which sort of will expose us to the nature of economic growth, and it will tell us about the factors that are possibly the explanations for the changes in the growth figures that we have just witnessed in few tables in the previous sections. So this is the first model. And the basic idea, the very basic idea of this model is that economic growth, which is the change in the level of per capita GDP or GNP, is nothing but the result of abstention from current consumption, which basically means that if so your current consumption is what you're consuming today. Now, if you believe that there will be some growth in the level of income that you hold today, it can only come through by sacrificing your current consumption. And that is the very, very basic idea. If you have to sort of summarize the entire idea of the Harrod-Dumar model in one sentence, and that is how you can do it. That's the best way you can summarize this model, which is that it is only through the sacrifices in the current consumption that you can think of growth in your income. And this sacrifice from current consumption more technically is called as savings. In a very basic and a very micro level sense, you can understand this. So suppose I have a certain level of income, and say I have a regular flow of income, but I'm not satisfied with the regular flow of income that I'm getting from a particular source, and I want to sort of think of more aspects of uh, increasing this income that I have. So what is the one way that I can increase this income is by saving some part of this income, and not using the entire income into my consumption. So what I'll do is I'll break my income into two parts. One is the basic basic part of income that I would need for sustenance, for subsistence, that will go into consumption, and the other is the amount of money that I would want to save. Now, how does this saving lead to more income is something that we will understand in a while. But just to give you an idea right now as well. So, if I save some money, I am definitely going to earn some extra income on it. So, at a very micro level, I am basically what I'm saving is actually getting invested. So these two pillars of savings and investment are the fundamental foundations of the process of economic growth. So the amount of savings that I am doing is actually getting translated into some investment. So suppose I I save this money in a savings account, or probably put this money in some kind of policy, or say I have created an FD for this part of income that I'm saving. So this money that is actually part of my income is actually being used by some other person or some other institution who's using this as a source of investment. Now, once this person or institution or a body uses this money, which is mine, as a source of investment, they are actually creating more income for themselves. So, probably say some institution using this money for say an expansion of their production. So, they are using this money for that. Now, once they use this money for that, they are definitely going to increase the output levels and further increase the income levels. So, my money is able to increase the income level for them as well as increase the income for myself. So, my savings, whatever money I had deposited in that source, will give me some interest income as well. So, that is actually creating more income for myself as well. So, the basic idea here is that you can only imagine an expansion in your economic resources, an expansion, more specifically expansion in income that you hold. It can only come through by some sacrifices today. So there is a trade-off here, which is the very basic element of economics, that because resources are scarce and to grow, we need to always make a trade-off. So this is sort of a trade-off between today and tomorrow. Now, economy produces variety of commodities, and the act of production generates income. The very same income is used to buy these commodities. Exactly which commodities are produced depends on individual preferences and the distribution of income. But as a broad first pass, the following statement is true. Commodity production creates income. So as I just told you, that suppose a company uses some extra amount of money into increasing their production capacity. So this extra production that they are now doing will actually create income, because the company or the firm that is increasing the production capacity will generate more income for themselves. If they are generating more income for themselves, then they are also going to generate more income for the people who are employed with them. So in a way, it is more production will definitely lead to more income and more income. So now when the employees of these company of this firm, if they have more income in hand, then they are definitely going to create more demand, and then more demand would mean that there has to be more supply. Now this firm again will understand that yes, there is demand for these commodities, so I should sort of plug this demand in and produce more. So this is like a cycle that will go on, and that's how the income or money will be created in this process. But exactly, so this is a very broad understanding of how this process works, but exactly what kind of commodities are produced, who will demand for what kind of commodities is definitely more complex looking. But to sort of understand how this process will basically work, it is important to understand this chain of operation. Okay, so let's go a step further and classify commodities into two groups. So broadly, you can classify commodities into two groups. One is the consumption goods, which are produced only for the purpose of satisfying human wants and preferences. So say the fruits that you buy in the market, or a pair of trousers that you would want to use, will come under these categories, which are only and only used for consumption purposes, only used for satisfying individual preferences. The other kind of commodities that could be produced are the capital goods. Now these are goods which are produced for producing other commodities. So say a blast furnace or a screwdriver or a conveyor belt, these are also commodities which are produced. They come under the production process, but they are produced for the purpose of um, not just self consumption, but also for producing other commodities. So these are the kinds of commodities which are called as capital goods. So broadly, very broadly, you can classify the kind of uh, production into these two kinds, which is consumption good and capital good. Now, it is obvious that the amount of income that's generated at a national level goes into the production of both of these commodities, consumer goods, which is consumption goods, or capital goods. Typically, we can expect households to buy consumer goods. We can expect households to consume goods which are only required for satisfying their preferences, whereas we can expect firms to buy capital goods to expand their production process, or to replace the worn out machinery that they are using in their production process. Now, this generalization immediately raises a question which, to some extent, I've already answered, which is that if all income is paid out to the households, and if households spend their income on consumption goods, where does the market for capital goods come from? So if we believe that households are spending their entire income on consumer goods, then where does the market for capital goods come from? If the entire income goes out to the households, and the households are only spending on consumption goods or consumer goods, then where exactly is the market for capital goods generated? And that is the part discussion for the next section. So I have somehow already answered this question, but let's look into this discussion more formally. The answer to this question, although in many senses that we ignore for now, deceptively so, households save. So the answer here is that people save. Households who get the income, there are two broad kinds of functions that they can do, they can perform. First is that they can consume consumer goods. The second option is that they can save, or they can sacrifice their current consumption and save a certain part of their income. And this no doubt some borrow too, that's true, to finance current consumption, but on the whole national savings is generally positive. So it's true that not everybody would be able to save some part of their income. It is possible that uh, the tendency for any household to save will only occur when they have enough income to cover their subsistence. If people, or if households are not able to cover their subsistence with the amount of income that they get, then definitely these households would not be able to save. and the extent to which households are saving will also differ depending on how much income they are earning for themselves and how much income do they require to cover their subsistence level of consumption. So it's possible that some households will also borrow, but on an average, on a national level, national savings are generally positive. So all income is not spent on current consumption. By abstaining from consumption, households make a pool of funds that firms use to buy capital goods. This is the act of investment. Buying power is channeled from savers to investors through banks, individual loans, governments, and stock markets. How these transfers are actually carried out is a story in itself. Uh, yeah, so as I just said that households, and actually this will is actually nicely summarized here in this figure here. So if you, this box represents the households here. You basically have two bodies here, one households and the other are firms, and this chart summarizes the flow of income from households to firms. So households, the outflow of income here is the consumption expenditure. So firms produce some commodities, they produce the commodities that the households would want to consume, and then households spend their income on these commodities that are being produced by the firms. So there is consumption expenditure, the outflow occurs from the households, and then this is an inflow for the firms. The money that the firms get is further translated into income. The money that the firms get by selling their commodities is the income that is being again translated to the households in the forms of wages, profits, rents. So it is not just the laborers who are being paid the wages, but it could also be the shareholders who earn some kind of profits. It could be people who have rented out their assets such as land or any other kinds of assets that are being given out to the firms. So the income can come to the households back in the form of wages, profits, or rents. And so this is the flow of income. So far, if a layman looks at it, we'll just see that the income flows from households in the form of consumption expenditure to the firms, and then the income is again translated back to the households. So where does the growth occur? The growth actually occurs from these two sources here. So first, outflow occurs from the households in the form of savings, and these savings are further being transferred to the firms in the form of investment. So these are the two pillars of any economy, and that's why you will notice that there has been a lot of focus on what is the savings rate for any nation, and savings rate plays an important role. So even from the policy maker side, there will always be an inclination or a boost to increase the level of savings. But the story doesn't stop there. So it is not just that if you have, say, a high percentage of the GDP getting saved in an economy, that doesn't necessarily mean or necessarily guarantee that that will get translated into investment. So for this process, for the process of converting savings into investment, you need a lot of other factors. One of the factors could be the role of institutions. So how strong is your financial network? Because we just noticed in the last paragraph that this conversion or this transfer of savings from investment occurs through some intermediary body. So it is not that if I am saving, so suppose I am saving a part of my income and putting that up in some kind of financial instrument, then I don't know which firm is using my money. I'm not, I don't have a direct connection with the company or the firm that will be using my money. Most of the savers will just put their money in some financial instrument, and it is the responsibility of that financial intermediary to transfer my money to the firms who would need this money as form of investment. So again, it depends on how strong the financial institutions are in your nation. so that even if you are saving, it is still possible that even if a nation is saving a higher percentage of their GDP, it is still possible that that doesn't get translated into the required amount of investment, probably because of the weaker financial institutions or non-availability of financial instruments, or maybe the market is not regulated, the market is not formalized. So there could be a lot of issues that could stop this, or that could create that could act as bottlenecks in this process of transmission of savings into investment. So I mean, we cannot rest assured that okay, my nation is saving a high amount of its GDP, so it's fine that I can sit back and relax and say that it's definite that my income will grow because my nation is saving a higher percentage of its income. That's not really true. It is important to sort of also look at these factors which could which could sort of withheld the process of transferring savings into investment. But I hope the basic idea is clear, that households save, and then this saving is invested into some sources, some financial instruments, and then these financial intermediaries are expected to transfer this money to the firms, and then firms will use this money. So say this is a bank, and households save their money in these banks, then the banks will, in the form of loans, or in forms of investments, in forms of, the channel could be different, but the basic idea is that they are lending this money out to firms, and then firms use this money to expand their business, to replace the machinery, the worn out machinery, and sort of expand their production capabilities, and hence produce more goods. More goods would mean more income, so they will produce more goods. More goods will mean more income. More income will again go back to households. Then households will again create demand for these goods. More income will increase demand. Increase in demand will again put pressure on the firms to produce more goods, and more income will also mean more savings, and then again this cycle will just start operating. But to make sure that this cycle is actually working, we need to focus on a lot of other factors. As I just said, that it is not always true that despite having more income, it's possible that the demand is not generated. So there has always been a concern of increasing aggregate demand, and what could be the possible bottlenecks that could stop this process, or that could create problems in the process of generating more demand. So, but if things are working well, if your institutions are right in place, if your policies are sort of promoting all the correct channels, then this cycle should start operating, and that is how growth will occur. And that's the basic idea of the basic background of the Harry-Domar model, that economic growth, more income can only be generated by abstaining from current consumption. This box here just gives you an idea of savings and investment in different societies. So it talks about how in the very, very ancient times, when primitive man were existent, then they were acting as both saver and investors. Sometimes it's possible that the individual is the sole individual who is also acting as a saver and also acting as an investor. But in more modern societies, you have these roles allocated to different individuals. So you have some individuals who would only save and some individuals who would only invest. So this box, I think you can read this up by yourself. It just tells you about the picture of savings and investment in different kinds of societies, how it is the responsibility of the government to maintain savings and investment in countries like Soviet Union, and how is it different in a capitalist nation. So you can just read this box up. I'm sure there wouldn't really be any issues with this box. Moving ahead now, when we talk about savings and investment, one very basic fact is that economic growth will be positive when investment exceeds the amount necessary to replace depreciated capital. So when we talk about conversion of savings in investment, that's the first prerequisite for the economic growth process to occur, that savings should get translated. First is that there should be some savings, some positive savings. Then the second is that the savings should get translated into investments. And this investment would further lead to economic growth only when the amount of investment, the level of investment that is occurring is greater than the amount that is necessary to replace depreciated capital, thereby allowing the next period cycle to recur on a larger scale. So when we talk about the production process, then there will be some amount of capital that will get depreciated or get depleted. So if you are adding on to this production process, then this addition should at least be greater than this amount of capital which is already depleted in the last year. Because suppose your investment is less than the depreciated capital or at max equal to the depreciated capital, then you are not really adding anything new to the production capacity. You are just sort of replacing the old machinery back with the new machinery, but you can't really say that this new machinery is in addition to the last year's production capacity. So investment will only lead to more income generation when this extent of or the amount of investment is greater than the amount required to replace the depreciated capital. So that's the basic fact that we should know for this process to occur. All right, so let's get into these equations. So the technical part of the model. So if we look at total output, then the total output can be written as this equation, where this t represents the time period. So this t could be 0, 1, 2, 3, and we are generalizing this to a time period t, and equation 3.1 says that yt is equal to consumption, current consumption plus savings. So the total income could be disaggregated into two forms. One is current consumption and the other is savings. The other side of this total income can be written from the production aspect. So this is the income that is broken down into two parts. Then you can also imagine the total income will be equal to total production, and this total production could be again disaggregated into two parts. One is consumption and the other one is investment. So the production side will give you this equation and the consumption side would give you this equation. So more like supply and demand, right? If you equate these two equations, then you will get the third equation, which is this equation, and this is called as the equation for equilibrium or macroeconomic balance, where basically the demand and supply are equal to each other. So if you put this yt equal to this yt, then the consumptions will get cancelled out and you will have savings equal to investment, which is a very basic fact that we have already done in our very basic economics courses. All right, now if we just look at the equation of investment, we are saying that suppose a fraction of the capital stock depreciates. Now then of course, so this delta times the total stock, this is the fraction that we are saying, this is the amount of the capital stock that depreciates in a particular year. Now capital stock in time period t plus 1 would be equal to capital stock in time period t. So if you expand this, then this is kt minus delta times kt. So capital stock in time period t plus 1 will be how much? The last year's capital stock, which is kt, minus the depreciated capital. So this is the amount of capital that is depleted from last year. So that has to be subtracted from the total amount of capital from last year, and then plus investment, which is this. So kt plus 1 will be equal to 1 minus delta kt plus it, which is investment in time period t. And this equation is a sort of a difference equation which tells you the changes in capital stock over different time periods. So a comparison, a relationship between capital stock in two time periods, time period t plus 1 and time period t. Now we are introducing two concepts here. First is the savings rate. Savings rate is nothing but the percentage of the total income that gets translated into savings. So this is capital ST, absolute amount of savings in any economy, divided by the absolute total amount of income. Notice that this capital YT here represents the total income and not the per capita income. So this is the aggregate level of income in the economy. So small s, which is the savings rate, is nothing but the ratio of capital S in time period t divided by capital Y in time period t. The second concept that we are introducing here is the capital output ratio, which we call as theta. So we are denoting this by theta. It is the amount of capital that is required to produce a single unit of output in the economy. So this is represented by this ratio, capital K in time period t divided by capital Y in time period t. So this is the amount of capital that is required to produce a single unit of output. So this ratio will tell you that to produce 1 unit of output, what is the amount of capital that's required. So if this number is larger, it means that to produce 1 unit of output, you need a lot of capital. If this number is smaller, then it means that to produce 1 unit of output, you need lesser amount of capital. Now we are, once we complete the equation for the previous equations that we've just built, which is equation 3.4 here, this relationship between capital stock, and equation 3.3, which was the equilibrium equation, that is savings equal to investment. If we combine these two equations, we will get the final Harrod-Domar equation, which relates these macroeconomic variables to the economic growth variable. And I will just explain how we reach this equation, but let's just first get an idea of how this equation looks. So this is the equation which is the Harrod equation, which gives you an idea of the Harrod model, which is S by theta is equal to G plus delta. So G here represents the economic growth rate of the total output. S represents, small s represents the savings rate, theta represents the capital output ratio, and delta represents the depreciation rate. So we are in a way saying that if savings rate increases, then the growth rate of total output will also increase. Remember that this equation talks about the changes in the total output, which is YT. YT is not per capita output, per capita income. This is total aggregate level of output or income. So G is YT plus 1 minus YT divided by YT, which is the usual growth rate formula. So this is YT plus 1 minus YT, income in time period T, the difference between income in time period T plus 1 and T divided by the income in time period T. So from this equation we can say that if savings rate increase, then the growth rate of income will increase. If capital output ratio decreases, then the growth rate of output will increase, and as depreciation decreases, growth rate of output will increase. So positive relationship with savings is well understood. If you look at it at a subjective, from a subjective perspective as well, it is clear that if more savings are there in an economy, then it will get translated into more investment. More investment would mean more production of goods, further leading to more income, and hence the income will grow at a higher rate. Small theta and G are inversely related. So as capital output ratio decreases, more will be the growth rate of income. Why? So again, theoretically well understood logical explanation is that if theta is smaller, it means that you require less amount of capital to produce 1 unit of output. So basically you are saying that now with a given set of capital, so suppose you have if suppose this represents the capital stock, then with the same amount of capital now, If your theta is lesser, say you require 2 sets of the machinery to produce 1 unit of output. So now with the same set of capital, you can produce more output. If theta was larger, suppose theta was 4, so which means that you require 4 units of capital stock to produce 1 unit of output, then definitely with the same amount of capital stock you would produce less output. If theta is smaller, meaning that you require less amount of capital to produce more units of output, then it means that you can produce larger amount of capital with the same amount of capital, larger amount of output with the same amount of capital stock. So smaller the value of theta, it tells you that your production process is more productive. So basically with the same set of stocks, capital stocks, you're producing more output, and that will lead to more income and hence higher rate of growth of income. Depreciation, why negative? Again, very logical that if depreciation is lesser, then less amount of old capital is getting depreciated, and hence with the same amount of investment you are adding more to the capital stock, you are adding more to the production capacity. So lesser the depreciation rate, higher will be the growth rate. Now, how do we actually reach this equation? Let's look at a quick derivation. It's not very difficult. Let's just move to the appendix and look at the quick derivation of this equation using the previous equation. So, how do we reach this equation? So, this was the capital equation. Kt plus 1 is equal to 1 minus delta Kt plus St. We have basically replaced, remember this was IT there, that was the amount of investment. We have just replaced IT with St because from 3.3 we know that at equilibrium investment will be exactly equal to saving. So we can replace IT with St. Further, we have just talked about the concept of small s, which is the savings rate, and we know that small s is nothing but the ratio of capital S and capital Y. So we can say that capital S is equal to small s into Yt for all time periods t. Also, from the definition of capital output ratio, we can say that capital K is equal to theta times Yt, because theta is the ratio of capital K and Yt. So these two equations come from the definitions of savings rate and capital output ratio. We are just substituting these two equations in the main equation here. So instead of Kt plus 1, we are writing theta Yt plus 1, because Kt is equal to theta Yt. So for time period t plus 1, it will be Kt plus 1 equal to theta Yt plus 1. So we are just replacing this term with this term here. 1 minus delta stays the same. Kt will be again theta Yt, and capital St is small s Yt. Now if you solve this equation, when you open the brackets here, on the left side you have theta Yt plus 1, you open the bracket here, which is theta Yt, here the first term, then minus delta theta Yt, the second term, plus Syt, right? Just opening the brackets. Then I am taking this theta Yt to the left hand side. This becomes theta Yt plus 1 minus theta Yt. Then on the right hand side I have these two terms, delta theta Yt plus Syt. I am taking Yt common from these two terms. Once I take Yt common from these two terms, I will be left with Yt, and then in the brackets I will have s from this term and minus delta theta from this term. So that is what I have in the brackets. Now the equation looks like this: theta Yt plus 1 minus theta Yt on the left hand side, and on the right hand side I have Yt into s minus delta theta. I am taking this Yt to the left hand side, so this will get to the denominator here, and I am taking theta common from here. So this left hand side will become theta, this is theta, Yt plus 1 minus Yt divided by Yt. This Yt has come from the right hand side, and on the right hand side I will just be left with this bracket, which is s minus delta theta. In the bracket, if you notice here, this is nothing but the growth rate of total output. So Yt plus 1 minus Yt divided by Yt, which is the growth rate of YT. So this can be written as G here, and I'm taking theta to the right hand side. So this, if I divide theta on the right hand side, then this first term will become S by theta, and since this term already has a theta, if I divide this by theta, then this will just become delta. So the final equation would then become G is equal to S theta minus delta. So that's what's written here as well. So the answer that we just got was G is equal to S by theta minus delta. We've just rearranged the terms here, and we can say that S by theta is equal to G plus delta, which is the Harrod-Domar equation that was being created for understanding that what are the factors that are possibly responsible for changes in the growth rate of income, of total income. Alright, but having said that, as I just said, that this equation only talks about the growth rate of total output, but we know that how just relying on total output, how misleading that can be, because we know that different nations differ in population, and we definitely need to take this factor into account to understand the actual nature of growth. So the amendment to this Harrod-Domar model is to incorporate the effects of population growth rate. So we are introducing a new term here, which is the growth rate of population, and we are just sort of converting our total parameters into per capita parameters now. So instead of capital YT, now I will have small yt, and this small yt is a per capita version of the total output. So if capital YT represents total output, small yt will be capital YT by population, total population, PT. So small yt will represent the total output per capita, which is total output divided by total population. And the population growth rate is defined as this. So we are saying that population grows at a rate of small n. So PT plus 1 is equal to PT into 1 plus n, which is, if you sort of rearrange this, this is nothing but PT plus 1 minus PT divided by PT will be equal to n. And if you rearrange this, you can also write it in this format, which is written here. If I rearrange this, then this will go here, it will become NPT, and then this PT will come on the right hand side and it will look like this equation. So PT plus 1 is equal to PT into 1 plus n, which is nothing but this equation. So we are basically saying that the growth rate of total population is written as small n. So how does the equation change when we bring this aspect into consideration? The equation looks like this. This is the equation for the Harrod-Domar growth model when we talk about the growth rate in total output. This is the equation when we talk about the growth rate of total output per capita, which is S by theta is equal to 1 plus G star. Notice that G star now represents to the rate of per capita growth. So we are not talking about capital YT plus 1 minus capital YT by YT. We are talking about small YT plus 1 minus small yt divided by yt. So G star represents this ratio, whereas G would represent the same ratio in terms of capital YT. Then we have 1 plus G star into 1 plus n minus 1 minus delta. This is the equation. So you will notice that from 3.5 to 3.6 you have some changes here. And how do we reach this equation? Again, we'll have to move to the appendix to understand that. Is everything clear so far? Should I get rid of the text here? We had reached this equation here from the first rearrangement. Now what we are doing here is that we are converting capital YT into small yt. As I just showed you, small yt will be equal to capital YT by capital PT, which denotes per capita income. We are only dividing both sides of equation 3.16, this equation. We are dividing both sides of this equation with PT. So if I divide this side with PT, this will become theta capital YT by PT, right? Now you will notice here, by dividing it with PT, I am also simultaneously multiplying and dividing the left hand term with PT plus 1. So I am dividing both sides with PT, that's the first thing I am doing. And then on the left hand side, I am also multiplying and dividing it by PT plus 1. Look here, then this YT plus 1 and PT plus 1, this ratio will become small yt plus 1. Theta is written here, and then you are left with PT plus 1 and PT plus 1 divided by PT. This is this ratio here. So what are we doing here? We are first dividing both sides with PT, and then we are also simultaneously multiplying and dividing by PT plus 1 on the left hand side, and that gives us this term. On the right hand side, we are dividing both the terms with PT. So 1 minus delta into theta, and YT by PT will give you small yt. Similarly, you divide PT with the second term, you will have small s, and YT by PT, which is small yt. Now in the second step, so this is the equation that we get by making these changes in the first equation, which is 3.16. Now what we are doing next is that we are dividing the entire equation by YT, small YT theta. On both sides we are dividing the equation by small YT theta. So if I divide this equation by YT theta, then thetas will get cancelled out, and I will be left with PT plus 1 by PT will stay unchanged, and I will just add one more term here, which is YT in the denominator. So small YT plus 1 by small YT, and here I will divide this by theta YT, then this entire term will get cancelled out, and in this second term YTs will get cancelled out, and I will add theta in the denominator. So basically I am dividing this entire equation by this term theta YT. Now we know that small yt by yt is nothing but 1 plus g star. So this is small yt plus 1 by yt is nothing but 1 plus g star, because we know that g star is what? It is the growth rate of small yt plus 1. And similarly, PT plus 1 by PT is nothing but 1 plus n, 1 plus growth rate of population. So if you can recall, we had written PT plus 1 is equal to 1 plus n into PT. So if I had to substitute the ratio of PT plus 1 by PT, then I would be left with what? 1 by n, 1 plus n. If I take PT to this side, it will give me the ratio of PT plus 1 by PT, and I will be left with 1 plus n. So that's where I've got these numbers, these terms from. YT, small yt plus 1 by small yt will be 1 plus g star, and PT plus 1 by PT will be 1 plus n. It will be equal to 1 minus delta plus s by theta.
How is it 1 plus G star?
Sorry.
How is it 1 plus G star?
So the same way as pt plus 1 is equal to 1 plus npt, you can also write small yt plus 1 is equal to 1 plus g star into small yt. G star is nothing but the growth rate of small y. I had just written in the last, when we were on the main text, I had written this in the form of yt plus 1 minus yt by yt. I had written yt plus 1 minus yt divided by yt is g star. So if you just rearrange these these difference equations, yt plus 1 by yt, if I take yt to this side, it will become yt plus 1 by yt, and on the right side, you will have 1 plus g star. So 1 plus g star into 1 plus n, if you remember, on the right hand side we have, this was the right hand side. So what we are doing here is that we are taking this on the right hand side, and we're just sort of rearranging. We are just taking some terms from the left hand side to the right hand side and so on. So this was the equation, and we are just reframing this equation, rearranging some terms to get our final equation, which looks like this. S by theta is equal to 1 plus g star into 1 plus n minus 1 minus delta. Now again, this is slightly a longish equation, and you would want to again further make it a little shorter to sort of get a more better idea of the relationship between these different parameters. So what we do here next is that we open up these brackets and look at a more simplified version of this equation. So when you open these brackets, what will you get? You will get S by theta. I am opening these brackets. I will get 1 plus G star, 1 plus G star plus N plus G star N minus 1 and plus delta. So I am just opening the brackets from 3.6. 1 will get cancelled out, and I am left with G star plus N plus G star into N plus delta. Now, notice that this number here, so there is a correction here in your text. When they solve this equation, they have written a minus term here, but it should actually be positive. So just, I mean, a very minute error here. So just keep that into your notice. Okay, now we can say, so we are basically converting this equation into an approximation. So you will notice a change in sign here. This is an equal to sign, this is an approximate sign. So although the equation should look like this, which is S by theta is equal to G star plus N plus theta plus delta plus G star N, but we can approximate this equation with this equation by saying that G star is a small number, growth rate is a small number such as 0.05, and then population growth rate is also a very small number. You convert these percentages into fractions and you get a very small number. Mathematically, you get a small number. And you know that if you multiply two small numbers, you get an even smaller number. So if you are multiplying something less than 1 with something less than 1, then you will definitely get an even smaller number. So going by that logic, we are saying that their product will be very small relative to other terms, and we can ignore them in our approximate relationship. So we are ignoring this term, saying that it will be too small relative to other terms, and approximately then we can say that S by theta is approximately equal to G star plus N plus delta. So what we are saying here is that the initial equation was, if you look at the first equation, which was ignoring the rate of rate of growth of population, then the equation was S by theta is equal to G star plus delta. So If you compare that equation with this equation, the only change here is that you've added a population growth rate term. So now we are saying that G star is positively related with savings rate, G star is positively related with, inversely related with capital output ratio, and negatively related with both population as well as delta. So why would it be negatively related with population? Because you are saying that if population increases, then the growth rate of per capita output will fall, which is very obvious because we are talking about per capita output, and if we keep everything constant, then we are saying that as population increases, per capita output will fall, and hence the growth rate of per capita output will also fall. Remember that this here is this is actually G, not G star. Remember that growth rate in this equation is the growth rate in per capita output, whereas growth rate in this equation was growth rate in total output.